Hello, viewers. Home Minister Amit Shah, a couple of days ago when he was campaigning in Assam, made a contentious statement. He said that not even 1 inch of Indian land has been encroached upon by China under the Modi government. The question is he right? So, to discuss this, we welcome you to the latest episode of Worldly Wise, where I'm joined by Mr. Dakshina Murthy, managing editor at TheFederal, and my colleague. He is an expert in international politics. So, let's dive right into the topic. Dakshin, let me ask you, is Amit Shah right?
Amit Shah is technically right because how can one country encroach upon another country's territory when the territory itself is in dispute? So it's like in the case of Kachetivu, where it was said that India ceded land to Sri Lanka. India ceded Kachetivu to Sri Lanka. The point there was it was not India's to cede the land; it was in dispute. Okay, so similarly, in the case of India, the border dispute between India and China, the border is still completely open in the sense that there are both India and China claim a large area of the border which has not yet been resolved. So encroachment cannot happen. We can only say that to a limited extent that China has pressed in on India and on Indian land, and where changes are made into in the line of actual control. Where there are troops on both sides patrolling the area, and that can marginally change when one country tries to push the other one. So, but encroachment is a very clear-cut, defined term where the land belongs to one and another entity tries to illegally or unofficially or unauthorizedly take over that land. So, in this particular case, there is no encroachment because the land belongs to neither or belongs to both, depending on how we want to see it.
So, you mentioned about LAC if there is no defined border. So, what is LAC then?
The line of actual control is basically the line where troops from India or troops from China are present and they are at the border. So that is the line of actual control. So what basically happens is the line of actual control is basically a kind of a informal agreement between the two countries, and where it has evolved over time in the sense that from the time India got independence and then you had China becoming a communist nation, over a period of time there has been the patrolling has been defined in a certain part of the land between India and China. So that is called the line of actual control. I mean, in short, where the Indian troops are and where the Chinese troops are, that is called the line of actual control.
Okay, so what is it that China is doing that is causing all this talks about encroachment?
Yeah. So what has happened is since the 62 war, if you go back in time, for instance, Aksai, okay, was a region that was patrolled both by India and by China. Okay, so after the 62 war, China pushed India out of Aksai, which means China pushed out the Indian security forces from Aksai and pushed them downwards towards Pangong Lake. So what it basically means is that, and then there are, for instance, you may have heard of this claim that 38,000 square kilometers of Indian territory in quotes has been occupied by China since 62. Now, what does that mean? It only means that it is a real thing. I mean, this is not something which is just used as a it's not just to in a speaking thing, or it's not theoretical. It actually has happened. So basically, the patrolling points or the line of actual control has been pushed down towards India by China. That's what it means, both in the west in the Ladakh region and in the east in the Arunachal Pradesh region. So both put together. So China has pushed India down, and it has taken over these areas where the Chinese soldiers are patrolling. It doesn't technically mean that this now belongs to China. India still claims land in Aksachin. India still has claims over this entire Ladakh region. So it has not been resolved. But in reality, you have Chinese troops which have come down towards India in the process, taking over 38,000 square kilometers. So this is what China has been doing. And the other thing that China has been doing is that it's not a continuous process. It happens in spurts. For instance, the latest one that happened was in 2020, that is 4 years ago. You must have, seen this Galwan Valley incident where the clashes happened, where Chinese troops and Indian troops got into a violent conflict. Of course, it was not an armed conflict; it was a hand-to-hand kind of a conflict, and Indian soldiers died. At least some 20 Indian soldiers died, and even some 4 or 5 Chinese troops also were killed in that. So that was the first big incident. So since 2020, there has been a issue where China has been pushing Indian patrolling points to an extent which has actually caused alarm. Okay, so you have areas like and then of course post Galwan. So Galwan was a low point or a high point, whichever you want to see, of the conflict in recent times, which caused these deaths. But post that, there have been disengagement talks between the Chinese and India, and some kind of a withdrawal has indeed occurred in Pangong. So along this line, Galwan, Pangong. So then you also have Gogra Springs, and then you also have Gogra and Hot Springs. So each one is basically patrolling point. So what the Chinese have done is they have withdrawn a bit, Indians have withdrawn a bit. So that kind of a disengagement has happened from looking at each other eye to eye. That kind of a thing has happened. And so, but it's all very fluid. It's all very fluid because it can change at any time, which means that fundamentally, as long as this dispute continues, okay, you may ask this question. So, where does this leave India? Where does this leave the dispute? So, what it basically does is that, it causes issues in the sense of the tension will continue, right? And then the consequences that follow.
What do we make of the latest developments or the actions of China from an Indian perspective? What do you make of China's actions?
Yeah. See, if you look at China today is a recognized big power. And if you take the balance of power between China and India, and even as Foreign Minister Jaishankar recently indicated, China is a much bigger power than India. So it obviously means it's difficult for India to take on China, right? Because, and also what the Chinese do is they don't outrightly come and just occupy land. They do that, but when the talks happen, because there is a mechanism that has been in place for the last several years, whenever there is a tension that occurs between India and China on the border, the core commanders of both the countries, they meet with each other, they sit down, they actually deal with it at a local level. That is the way the mechanism has been built. So each time the tension increases, a kind of a push occurs either way. They actually call for a meeting, and then they resolve it. For instance, from 2020 after Galwan till now, there have been at least, I think, about 21 rounds of talks that have happened at the local level whenever these tensions have occurred. Okay, so what happens is, but then if you see what China does is they have employed this strategy called salami slicing. Okay, now what is salami slicing? What they do is, for example, if the Chinese move towards Indian territory, the push, into not Indian territory, the patrolling point, that is the Indian patrolling points. If they push the Indians, say they come, say 100 feet, for example, and then India objects to it, and there are talks that are held. What the Chinese will do is they will go about 60 feet back. So
right.
what happened? They have gained 40 feet.
Right.
So they have been doing this very gradually and strategically over the last several years. So it's a slow movement that happens, and then and suddenly when you compare where the Indian patrolling points were today to, let's say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, you'll suddenly find that the patrolling points have come towards India, which
Right.
means that the Chinese have gained. So, but then how do you counter this? the important question is, how
Yeah, I
does
was
India?
going to ask that. So, what do we make of India's stand
Yeah.
in this issue, or how are we handling it? Or
Yes. So, India, for instance, cannot get aggressive. In a sense, you can't afford to
right,
get aggressive.
right,
In Galwan, it happened. It was probably a spontaneous local level, a fight that happened, and but then these are pretty tricky because a small clash like this can blow up into a big thing, right? In actual maybe a conflict or something like that. And then the advantage, at least on paper, what happens actually we don't know, but on paper, the Chinese hold all the cards, at least most of the cards, right? And India, if you look at the larger relationship between India and China, for all the rhetoric against China, China is playing a huge role in many of the it exports a lot of very essential commodities like pharmaceutical goods and electronic goods and all that. So even garments, silk garments, and all kinds of cloth. So if the Chinese, for hypothetically speaking, suddenly stop sending any of these, it's going to cause massive issues in India. So there is also now, along with this military issue, the land issue, there is also the economic issue, the trade, diplomatic relationship, and the general nature of friendship or relationship between these two countries. What it shows is that there is a kind of a interdependence that has also been built in today, and the dependence of India on China is more than the dependence of China on India. Okay, so that is also one of the reasons why you will notice that the Indian government, the Modi government, never openly by name criticizes China. In fact, in the interview to Newsweek, I think, which has just been published, which the reports have come, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has very clearly said that it's very necessary for India and China to have a good relationship, and they must resolve all their existing pending issues and stuff. So it's India has always been conciliatory, mind you. Okay, and when India has become a little belligerent, they have not named China. I'm talking of people like even the Prime Minister, because they can't afford to. So within this parameters, you have this dispute on the border, and the Congress is now saying, so he's now, it's in the opposition, so it is now taunting the BJP and saying, you are trying to belittle the issue or trying to negate the issue. And in fact, they interpreted this Amit Shah statement that, land has not been, even one, no land has been encroached by China in a different manner. So the Congress has, tried to say that you are not acknowledging what is actually happening on the ground or something to that effect.
yeah,
Okay,
even
so
even a few years back in the parliament, they raised the same issue when the government had said that 38,000 square
that's right.
kilometers of land was occupied, and then the prime minister said it was 42,000, and then there was a clarification that 5,000 square kilometers of land was actually ceded by Pakistan to China, which they
Correct.
had illegally occupied. So Congress has been raising this time and again. So I'm going to come back to the first question, and after, now that you have explained all the technicalities, or what do you call, yeah, the technical loopholes, let me ask you again: is Amit Shah right, or could we say that Amit Shah is not wrong? Which would be the right thing to say?
Actually, I think there's a third way of putting it, which is to say that Amit Shah is technically right, but practically he's wrong.
Right. Okay.
Because when you say that there is no encroachment, people shouldn't misunderstand that to mean that China has not come towards India, has not occupied area towards India. But the fact is that China has pushed Indian patrolling points. Let me give you a more concrete point to back what I'm saying. See,
Right.
there was an issue with Pangong Tso. Okay, or Tso is lake in Tibetan, so Pangong Lake, right? And you have there some natural formations called spurs, which in popular terminology are called fingers.
Okay.
Okay. Now, to begin with, India was in control of all the 8 fingers,
Right.
and the Chinese troops were away from those 8 fingers. So this was the situation. But today, when China pushed hard on the patrolling points, and it came, it to the point where India had to withdraw to the fourth finger, which means they lost those area that covered the four fingers, right? There was a so there was a kind of a the disengagement talks happened, and today what has happened is China is in the control of the eighth finger. There the between eighth and the fourth, or it becomes a no man's land, and Indian patrolling points stop at finger four. What it means is that India has lost the land from finger eight to finger four in reality. Though you can call it, though it's a no man's land from 4 to 7, or say 5 to 8. The point here is earlier it was an Indian patrolling point, so which means Indian troops were present. So Indian troops have been pushed out, but the Chinese are now in on finger 8. So which means they made that slight inward movement towards India. India has been pushed back. So this is what I mean. So, and this is constantly happening. Okay, and it would, in fact, if you ask me the question, so how is it going to end? Where is it all going to lead to? I would, in fact, even propose or say that it is in India's interest to resolve this border dispute as ASAP.
But from what you said, it looks like India is on the back foot
Yeah,
because of the dependence that we have on China,
yeah,
and that we cannot. It would not be very wise on our part to go for a combat with China either. So, if
yeah.
looks
See,
like India is completely on the back foot here.
yeah. So the a combat is not good for both countries. Let's put it that way. But India would, it would affect India more. So the best alternative is to resolve this dispute one way or the other. Decide, one way or the other, have a border, definitive border, so that all this confusion and this fluidity can be removed once and for all, and we can get on with other issues. Then India and China can focus on their other relationships instead of letting this border dispute, weighing down their, or impacting their other relationship. The border dispute can be resolved. Okay, there's some kind of an element of give and take. In fact, historically, China has always been interested in the Ladakh region, that is to India's west. And it has been always willing to give up on India's east towards Arunachal Pradesh. Because for China, strategically, the Ladakh region is more important. It's more important because there is an easy access to Tibet.
Right.
In fact, if you look at the Pangong Lake, the finger eight, I know after finger eight, it's almost, it gets into Tibet. So it is very crucial for China to prevent any future kind of challenge to its hold on Tibet. So they're very particular that this area they have to secure. They are not that much keen on the east. So this proposal was, in fact, formally put out by China and offered to India in 1959, when Mao Zedong was there and Zhou Enlai, the prime minister, was there. So it's this was formally proposed to India. At that point in time, the Nehru government did not accept it. And then since then, China, if you look at it now, China's interest is towards this Pangong Lake. Pangong has a north bank and a south bank. India is far, Indian patrolling points are, much more stable and are present in the southern bank. To the northern bank is all these issues because it's closer to Tibet. So some kind of a give and take, some kind of a political, foresight, and all that. So until the border dispute is resolved, and both countries then can relax with whatever they have, things will move into a better shape. So then the threat factor also will come down. The insecurity on the border also will be reduced. But then, well, there is absolutely no indication that anything of that kind is on the cards as of the moment.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.